Yes, another episode of Guns I Know, episode 5. And this is a very special episode because we're going to be talking about something that we all get to talk about at least once in our lives or get told about. I'm talking about birds and bees. I'm not talking about how babies are made. Instead, I'm talking about how gun babies are made. These gun babies, how do they get in the United States? What does and doesn't get in the United States? Why some guns that we see in games are everywhere. You can go to a local gun shop and buy one. Others that you may play very regularly with in-game are never, ever inside the United States. I'm going to talk about this because when one of my recent gun comparison videos came out, I got a lot of traffic, and that's good. I like traffic. Everyone does. Well, not the driving traffic, but you know what I mean. And I got a lot of comments. I probably got 50 comments ranging from sort of positive to neutral to way negative of why don't you go full auto with your guns? And anywhere from, daskro, I really think you should go full auto. Thanks. I like your videos. I subbed you. That's great. Or neutral, hey, you should really go full auto. To neutral, you are a coward for not going full auto. Or you are a huge wimp for not going full auto. If you were a real man, you would go full auto. Things like that. And I'm doing this video to try to clear up some of the misconceptions of what's out there for full auto, what's not out there for full auto, or things of that nature. And I'm going to do this to also describe how things get in the United States as well, as I mentioned before. Well, how do we start this off? Well, we had to start back in 1968. 1968 was when the Gun Control Act of 1968 was passed. It fundamentally changed how guns were transferred and imported into the United States. And one of the most notable things was a new definition of rifles. Rifles were put into essentially three different types of categories. You had sporting rifles, non-sporting rifles, and then Title II rifles, which are either short-barreled rifles or machine guns. And technically, machine guns aren't rifles. They're actually their own subcategory of itself, but I'm not going to go into that for right now. What's a sporting rifle versus a non-sporting rifle? Well, according to the law, sporting rifle is essentially a rifle used for hunting, skeet shooting, trap shooting, which is shotgun sports, and long-range target shooting. It's not for plinking. It's not for practical shooting, such as three-gun matches or practical pistol matches. The kind of stuff you see on Top Shot, on the TV show Top Shot, that is not considered sporting according to both the ATF and this law. So it means that all the guns you see in there are regulated differently. What do I mean by that? Well, the non-sporting rifles have a number of features. I'm going to show you this using this gun. This is an AK Draco short-barreled rifle. And they can do a few things. When they have a detachable magazine with a large capacity, and so this is a detachable drum magazine, 75 rounds. It has a folding or telescopic stock, and so what I can do is that I can try to fold it down so it's folding, and as such it's also regulated. It has a pistol grip, which is this thing right here. It has a flash suppressor or hider, the ability to accept it, which is why it has basically it's a threaded barrel, which is what this has. It has an integrated military-style bipod. This one doesn't have that. It can have night sights, which this one doesn't have either, although this Yugo has one. Or it has a grenade launcher or grenade launcher sights. So, how many of these things that I mentioned do you have to qualify non-sporting rifles? Well, it's arbitrary. The ATF decides based on each individual gun what they think is considered sporting versus non-sporting rifle. And because of that, non-sporting rifles have been prohibited from being imported into the United States since 1989. And so, real deal, 100% imported AKs haven't been imported in their non-sporting configuration since 1989. Same thing goes with the Star AUG, with the HK91s or G3s, with the G53s or the HK53s, or HK93s actually, excuse me. I'm getting my nomenclature wrong. MP5s, those kind of things. All those guns, they don't come in anymore as complete guns. So what's a sporting rifle? A sporting rifle is basically things that don't fall into those categories. They can be readily imported from anywhere as long as we have good trade relations with that given country, and they don't have any scrutiny. But if that's the case, how do I own these guns? And I'll tell you, these are not illegal. These are all legal guns. How do they come in? Well, they come in one of three ways. they come in the form of sporting rifles that have been converted to non-sporting configurations. They come as parts kits, or they come in even as pistols and then converted either to rifles, short-barreled rifles. Although that is a bit of an odd legal question that I'm not going to go into as much, but I just wanted to mention it nonetheless. So if they can be brought in and then converted non-sporting configuration, what's the criteria? Well, there's this criteria called 922R compliance, which is part of the 1968 Gun Control Act. And it basically reads like this. It basically says that, that if you were to construct a non-sporting rifle off imported parts, it can contain no more than 10 of the 20 described cannibal parts as mentioned in the law. Some of these parts include the receiver, the barrel, the bolt carrier, the operating rod, the seat area, disconnector, trigger. I'm just reading through the list here. Buttstock, pistol grip, handguards, magazine bodies, magazine followers, magazine floor plates. 20 different things. And for those that are astute will know that some guns don't have these things. A semi-automatic AK doesn't have a sear. What's another good example? An MP5 or an HK91 would be a better example. It doesn't have a sear either, but it also doesn't have a what am I thinking of? An operating rod. It just has a bolt and bolt carrier. So different guns, by their design, don't have some of these parts. So 922R compliance basically means that whenever I build a gun, I have to have at the most 10 imported parts. And if I want to have a gun that functions, I have to replace so many of those parts of the total that are there with US parts. And that's exactly what happens. And so the first example I'm going to give is the Saiga 12. Saiga 12 comes in as a sporting rifle. It comes in as a sporting shotgun. It doesn't have a pistol grip when it comes in. It has sort of a traditional hunting stock on it. It doesn't have a threaded muzzle. It doesn't have a it has a detachable magazine, but the magazine that it comes with is only 5 rounds. So they're not imported with big rounds. They're imported with a 5-round magazine. And because of that, it's considered sporting when it is imported in the United States. I then take this rifle. I didn't take it personally. This was actually done by Tromix, which is a sort of one of the best names out there in Saiga conversions, Saiga 12 conversions rather. And this is what he did. He swapped out the pistol, the old buttstock, for a folding stock that is 100% U.S. made. He swapped out he took the trigger, moved it forward, and then put in a U.S.-made pistol grip, a Galil-style U.S.-made pistol grip. He took the handguards off, and he put in a U.S.-made, in this case, a Tapco Galil-style handguards. He threaded the muzzle and put a U.S. front sight and U.S. muzzle brake on it. And I'm also using an AGP Arms 10-round U.S.-made magazine with a U.S.-made follower and a U.S.-made floor plate. That makes this gun a U.S.-compliant non-sporting rifle, or shotgun in this case. Isn't that a bit complicated? It sounds a bit complicated because it is a bit complicated. For all intents and purposes, this is not considered an imported rifle, even though it says made in Russia. On the air side, it says made in Russia. It's not. The law now considers this a U.S.-made gun with imported parts. Now you'll say, wait a minute. When this gun gets brought in, it works. It's a U.S. made. It's an imported gun. It shoots, it fires, and the only thing you're doing is changing out accessories. You're just because you put a spoiler on your Honda Civic doesn't make it faster. Doesn't make it better. Entirely true. But because the law is written, when I convert this, when I put these things on here, and I go into and I start creating these non-sporting features, such as the threaded muzzle brake, such as the pistol grip or the folding stock, I'm actually creating a different classification of gun, and thus the law applies differently. And so I've actually taken this gun and actually turned it from an imported gun to a U.S. compliant non-sporting rifle. That's one way that we can take these guns that get imported in and are changed accordingly. That, of course, brings up a very interesting question. So if I need to find a country that imports these in, there's going to be some countries that we can import to. So, for instance, the KH-2002 is an Iranian gun. And we don't have good relations with Iran right now, as some of you may know. Because of that, even if they make a spoiler version of the KH-2002, we'll never be able to see it because the State Department will never allow it to be imported because we have sanctions against Iran right now. Same thing goes with Chinese guns. We have sanctions against them for a variety of different reasons. I'm not going to go into that in this episode. I could dedicate a whole episode to that. And so we're not going to see a lot of these guns out there. How else, though, do guns come in? They come in the form of parts kits, which is what this gun's made out of, and this gun's made out of, an RPK-74 and a Yugoslavian M72 milled. But what is a parts kit? Well, let me show you. I'm really excited about this. Hopefully you guys are too. This is going to get kind of wonky. I have parts kits. They come in boxes. I got 1, 2, come on, and 3 parts kits. Parts kits are essentially a cut-up gun. What do I mean by that? It's essentially, I'm going to take this gun, big gun, oh my goodness. Come on, gun. Oh, don't fall down. There you go. It's basically this entire complete gun, cut up, the receiver, which is the serialized component of the gun, cut up, and then put into a box, and then shipped over. The ATF does not consider a cut-up gun to be a gun, but instead parts, almost like if you were to take all the components of a car minus the axle or the engine or whatever serialized components there are. Cars actually have multiple serialized components, and then just sell that as scrap as opposed to a full car. So they cut these all up and they ship them over, and they're imported in because they're not considered guns. How do they look? So let me show you these two examples. I have a 1983 ISMASH AK-74 parts kit. And so here's like the gas tube. Here's the, I have a clean rod. That's kind of boring. look at this wood. Oh my goodness. Look at this wood. See, there's the part of the receiver it's cut up. Oh, look at that. That's all awesome. Awesome orange wood. I have a pistol grip. I have a trigger guard. I have the gas block. Now, these parts kits come in with cut barrels, which is really unfortunate. Older parts kits don't come in with parts barrels, but thanks to the Bush administration in 2008, 2009, they had the barrel ban, which said that we consider the barrel to be something that also needs to be cut up, so they cut them as well. That's why I have these barrels. These are U.S.-made barrels that I are going to be weighing. So this is an 83 ISMASH kit, super rare, really super rare. And then I have a 1980, what's this, a 1987, 88, what does it say on it? Yeah, it's a 1988 AK-74 kit, also by ISMASH, but with the purple furniture. I love that purple stuff. It's so good looking. And, I got things like, the trunnion, and this is the case, the front trunnion. I have the rear sights. These are all things that are part of the components. All these things in this box are what you see in here, except the receiver's all cut up. And so I have to buy a receiver in the U.S., or I can take a sporting rifle and gut it and then use that receiver if I wanted to, as long as I only have 10 imported parts. I also have, in this case, I don't know what year this is. This is a, oh, come on. Whoa, look at all this stuff. This is a Bulgarian AK-74 kit. Oh, don't fall. Don't fall. So you got the wood, it looks really shitty. That's because this one actually has seen some wear. That has, let me get out the actual good stuff. Ooh. Here we go. There we go. See, there's the front part of the gun. Front part of the gun, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. This one, no, I don't know. I want to say this one actually does have, it looks like this is how old parts kits used to look like. They came in with the barrel intact. And I want to say this is actually a US-made barrel that's simply repressed in, but I'm not 100% sure. And the reason why I say that is that the pin that holds the barrel pin has sort of been punched in and out, which leads me to suspect that this is a U.S.-made barrel to be put back in, and so I'll have to be re-put back in anyway. But that's how these guns look. So I'm going to eventually build all these guns over time because the kits, depending on when you bought them, were very inexpensive. Some are more expensive than others. Some are more rare than others. And so, oh yeah, this one's really cool. I also got a bayonet with this one, so I got a bayonet. I'm going to bayonet them, and that's I actually put on the bayonet right now. Oh, watch out! I have a knife. Be careful. What is this doing? I'm going to put the knife down right now, and Get out of here. And so this is how I go. I go like this. I go, oh, I got a bayonet. And then I put it on. I got to push this button down to release it in place. And now I'm ready to stab some people. The fact this thing has a bayonet lug in, you want to go back to 1994, so it's a ban which expired, which doesn't mean it's no longer law. Having a bayonet lug was illegal. You couldn't have a bayonet lug. And so you don't want those drive-by stabbing people in your car. No, no, no. And so I'm going to pull this back out. And where'd that sheath go? Oh, here it is. Put the sheath back. Don't stab myself. I didn't stab myself. That's good. And you'll notice, this is one of my favorite T-shirts. This is my Communist Party T-shirt. I wore this because I'm dealing with all Soviet era weapons. Well, Yugo's a non-aligned party, to get the idea. And so I got, who do I got? I got a bunch of dudes here. I got Stalin, he's sort of chilling in the back. I got Che Guevara, he's having a good time, revolution. Lenin's sort of chilling out. Chairman Mao's hanging out. And Karl Marx has a lampshade on his head. He is drunk. It is a communist party, no doubt. So these are all parts kits. They come on in. You have to get a certain number of U.S. compliant parts so that you can create a complete gun while staying within 92R regulation. It's not number of U.S. parts. It's actually the maximum number of imported parts that you utilize. So I have all these kits. I'm going to build these guns. And you may say, oh, well, daskro, you already have a bunch of AK-74s. Why do you want more AK-74s? Well, it's because I actually collect them. You can collect them. There are huge differences between an 83 kit versus an 88 kit. Huge differences between these two Russian kits versus this Bulgarian kit. And that's part of the cool thing about collecting anything, is that there's these nuances and design changes and production changes that really make it all very fascinating. And so I'm not really collecting it because I'm going to create a militia or something like that. I'm doing it because I like collecting this kind of stuff. And I actually have a collector's license too, a CNR, for those that know what that is. So that's how these get made. And they either get made by U.S. made guys, or they get made by just Joe Schmoes. They buy a receiver in the U.S., they stamp them together, and then you're good to go. You have to do a bunch of other things and clean them up and repaint them and other things of that nature, but pretty cool. Now, there's another way that you can also do that. You don't have to have a U.S.-made receiver. You can actually make your own as well. This is a milled Yugoslavian M72. I've shown it in previous episodes, and this has a milled receiver. It's one solid piece of steel. It's not stamped and then folded. So it actually came in all these pieces. Well, there's a guy who is very, very good at welding, named Turbo This, on the AK forums. What he does is that he will take these parts kits and then make a U.S., he'll basically build a repair piece, and then he'll re-weld it together. The act of him re-welding it together, in terms of labor and in terms of the part itself, makes it a U.S.-made part. And so it actually turns these front and rear stubs into U.S.-made parts. It's a weird way the law works, and it's on a case-by-case basis. So this doesn't mean that if you find, let's say, for instance, a PPSH kit, which are really cheap, or actually PS43 kits are actually a little cheaper, and then you re-weld it, that it suddenly becomes a U.S. made. It's on a case-by-case basis. But he made it U.S. compliant. We had some U.S. compliant parts with the grip and with the muzzle nut and what have you, and the operating rod, and now it's a U.S. made gun. So that's how they all get made. But this doesn't answer the question of what's full auto. Why can't I go full auto? Well, these are all Title I weapons. These are all semi-automatic weapons. Title II weapons, which include short-barrel rifles, suppressors, discharge devices, such as grenades, and rocket launchers, and things like that, they're regulated differently. And the machine gun, which is a Title II weapon, which means it has to be registered, and you can check out episode 1 or 2 when I talk about the registration process. It requires you to register it. And the registry, which is a list of machine guns that are on the registry, that's been closed for a while. It's been closed since 1986. It means that there are only a limited number of machine guns available to civilians in the United States. By most estimates, and there's no, I mean, these are all guesswork, about 200,000 machine guns that are civilian transferable are available in the United States for anyone who can buy a Title I weapon to buy. Well, why don't I have one? Well, basic supply and demand states that the more people that are interested in buying them, with a limited supply, make the price go up, which is why in episode 4 I talk about how that an AK, a full auto transferable AK, is $18,000. $18,000. It's more than a car. It's because there's so many people that want AKs, full auto AKs, but there's only a limited supply of them. So that you can't. I don't have $18,000 to spend on a full auto gun. It's a hobby. If I did, that'd be awesome. And there's other ways you can get around it. So, for instance, when you look at a guy like FPS Russia, he, for the most part, is going to a manufacturer who has a manufacturer's license and a SOT, which is a special occupancy tax permit, that allows them to build on, for their own purposes, testing, design, otherwise, their own machine guns out of these parts kits. Because take in mind, these parts kits, when they come in, maybe I can get a good example of this. Maybe if I can find it. Yeah, here we go. These parts kits, they're not sanitized for semi-auto. No, they come in as full auto guns. So this piece right here is a full auto sear. I'm not going to use this piece when I build this gun. None of my guns have this mechanical component in them, and then when it gets built, I'll throw it away. And likewise, this disconnector has a full auto catch for maintaining full auto fire versus semi-auto fire. I can't use this disconnector because this disconnector is part of that full auto configuration. So all the components are available. It's just that only the licensed and permitted manufacturers can build them in a full auto fashion. So when you see, going back to FPS Russia, when you see him shooting full auto guns, he's going to his class 2 SOT friend who builds machine guns for a living and says, hey, let me borrow this M60. Let me borrow this full auto AK. Let's go ahead and convert an M14 to full auto M14 and we'll have fun there. That's what he does. Now I do the same thing. My full auto Tantal videos is the same thing. I got a friend who does it. He has a lot of guns that are a little bit more esoteric, but nonetheless though, he doesn't have an AK-74U, and so unless he has one, I'm not going to be able to shoot one that's full auto unless I find someone else that does have one that does have a full auto. And frankly, there aren't that many Class 2 SOTs out there. So I live in a city that has about 1.5 million people. There are probably 3 Class 2 SOTs in the metro area at best, and I know them all. I know almost all of them. There's one I don't know, and so I have a rapport with a lot of them, but some of them don't have the guns that I want to shoot, that kind of thing. So that's why the way it works. Now you can say, well, Dask, why don't you just get a Class 2 SOT or get a Class 3 FL and get one transferred to you as a dealer sample or a post sample, which is a whole other thing that I'm not going to talk about, because you'd save money. I don't want to go through with that. It's not right now, at least in my life. Maybe later when I settle down or things like that. And I can create a gun making business on the side, but not going to do that right now. So I think that sort of answers that question for the most part. Oh yeah, one more thing. So I mentioned the third thing, the way these guns come in is through they get imported as pistols. Pistols are not regulated by the 922R compliance, and so you can have 100% imported pistols that can come in a variety of configurations. So when you want to buy a Taurus, which is a Brazilian gun, it comes in with parts 100% made in Brazil. There's no regulation requiring that. Now, why do I have this gun in my hand? Well, the Draco, which is what this gun is, comes in as a pistol. You're like, what does that mean? Yeah, it comes in without a stock, with a welded up muzzle brake, and that's it. And it has a pistol grip. All pistols have pistol grips, hence the name. And so it comes in as that, and it's considered a pistol, even though that it has a big magazine and it has and it looks kind of menacing. But technically, it's a pistol. So when I had to convert this to a short-barreled rifle, I had to make it U.S. parts compliant, and it is. I got all these U.S. parts in it. Does this make sense? It's really complicated. It really is, and it's really nuanced, and it's such on a case-by-case basis because sometimes the ATF rules that something isn't considered a pistol because of the length or because of certain features or things around those lines. It's all very complicated, and it makes importing very difficult at times. Anyway, let's go back. I've been talking for a long time about this. Going to talk about your questions. So the first question was done by MT Tash, or M Tash. He says, I bought a GB Wasser a little bit ago. I had reservations about Century Arms. It's not exactly an A+ weapons company. I saw their videos failing, yada, yada, yada. The question is, as far as AK goes, where do Wasser 10s and 1063s stand on the chain of quality in the AK series? Good question. This question comes up a lot in gun forums. And it's important to talk about Century Arms and then talk about the Wassers specifically. Century Arms is, no doubt, the biggest importer of AKs and other parts kits in the U.S. right now. Number one, they're about a $50 million a year company. They import most of the surplus ammunition in the United States. We're talking about hundreds of ISO shipping containers full of ammunition, stuff that you see like in war zones. I mean, they're not buying from war zones; they're buying from old European and South American stockpiles, and they bring them in. They bring in a lot of guns, and they sell a lot of guns. And the Wasser 10s are made in Cougar. And actually, the 1063s are actually an odd case. You guys can correct me on this, but 1063s are actually not made in Romania. They're actually made in the U.S. The Wasser 10s are made in Romania. They're made in the same factory that the actual Romanian AKs were made in decades ago. The Cougar factory. C-U-G-I-R. Probably pronouncing that wrong. It's okay. They come into sporting rifles, just like how I described this one. It has a hunting stock. It doesn't have a pistol grip. It has its muzzle brake welded on. And then it gets imported to Century. Century then takes out the muzzle nut and replaces it with whatever. They put in a U.S.-made compliant parts to make it 92R compliant, and then they resell it to distributors and other things around those lines. And there's a lot of question about quality. Well, Century sells a lot of AKs. And they sold a lot of Wassers over the years, and they've been selling them for a long time, for almost 10 years now. Before the Wassers, you had the SAR series, and I have one of those. And the quality is sort of hit or miss. And the quality concerns are usually within one of 2 to 3 categories. The first one is the front sight. Good example. This one. The front sight is canted. It means that when I line up and look between the front sight and the rear sight, it's canted. It's not zeroed in correctly. And that makes it difficult to be accurate with it. That's one complaint. Another complaint has been the magazine is too wobbly and it doesn't feed right, or the feed ramp is messed up. Another complaint is that the trigger feels like shit. And because it feels like shit, it's not fun to shoot because it's a sloppy trigger. These are all quality control issues that have happened, but with the exception of the trigger, which is all on Century, all the other stuff is actually problems that come from the Cougar factory. Now, that being said, for the amount of volume of Wassers out there, most of them actually are pretty good. Why are they good? Well, one, they have 100% made in Romania chrome-lined barrels, which means the barrels are much more resilient to rust and debris compared to non-chrome-lined barrels. Most other AKs on the U.S. market that are not from Romania have U.S.-made non-chrome-lined barrels. Another example, it has a shitty sort of finish. That's because that's how the finish looks like in Romania. Romania doesn't have it. I mean, Cougar is not this fantastic AK factory. A lot of AK factories out there aren't that great. We sort of have this idealized standard of what guns should look like coming out of a factory. When we go to a Cabela's or a Bass Pro Shop, we look at that new gun. It's all slick. It's all nice looking. It looks almost looks something like this, where everything's all smooth and nice. The furniture is all clean and sparkly. I mean, everything just glistens off of it. And it's all oily because it's all well kept. We have this expectation of what guns should look like when we buy them, and the Wasser looks just the opposite. It looks really crudely put together. That's because AKs really are crudely put together. With the exception of maybe the Chinese AKs made in Norinco and Polytech in the 80s, which were really sort of the Cadillacs of AKs, the Izmash and Tula and Molad AKs, which were the original factory Russian AKs, and maybe even some of the Bulgarian ones, most other AK factories did not have that great of quality in terms of aesthetics. I'm not saying that they made bad guns or guns that didn't work, but those are some of the issues behind it. Wasser 10s are great guns for entry-level AKs. They're really inexpensive. They're really inexpensive. 1063s, which I think are the ones that come in as Romanian parts kits and made by Century, they're okay too, but I would caution that they're probably not as good as the Wasser 10s because Century does have a mixed record with building AKs. And that's a whole nother episode I could go into, is the sort of paradox of Century arms. I actually like Century arms, but there have been some huge quality control issues that I could speak a whole episode about. So hopefully that answered your question, MTash. The next question by Alaskan Hybrid. My question for you is, do you have a knife collection, any knives of interest, or interested in different kinds of knives? Answer, no. I'm not a knife guy. There are guys that love collecting knives. There are guys that love connecting bayonets, love collecting AK bayonets, or any other bayonets. I'm just not into it. And I'm not trying to hate on them. It's not my thing. Next question. Reborn Nixify says, is there a huge difference between a gun in real life and its BF3 counterpart? Weapons in video games seem to exaggerate the recoil to minimal, whereas real life, it looks like the weapons had real kick. That is a good question. The answer is yes, yes, yes. In-game, for purposes of keeping everything constant, it assumes that you are this first-tier operator that's super strong, and I'm clearly not super strong, who can maneuver and manipulate the gun like this. He's got to push a reload button. He just does this fantastic movement that's almost like reflexes. And he can fire and recoil, and the only recoil differentiation that we see in games are either that the gun moves up and you got to move your mouse or your joy pad down, whatever it is, or you get this sort of odd bullet spread. Well, in real life, the bullet spread really isn't that different in guns relative to that in the games. You have deviation and accuracy, but it's measured in millimeters to centimeters even or to inches even. It's not huge swaths out there. Some guns in full auto fire are more difficult to control, but if you're this super operator in the game, or let's say you actually are a real operator in real life, you will put enough rounds down range through practice, through training and moving, manipulating the weapon, that you'll be able to control the rapid fire very easily. It's like riding a bike. Once you get a feel for how to ride a bike, you can just start doing it very easily. Once you get a feel for how the gun operates, when you are firing multiple shots, it becomes easy. It really does. And so that's a huge issue. I don't know how, and I'm not stating that these games do it wrong. I can't think of a better mechanic to simulate that. No different than in Battlefield 3 with suppression. People say, suppression is not realistic. Well, yeah, but at the same time, people in real life do get scared in battle. And there's no threat of death in a game. And because of that, I can run right into a line of fire, and then because the guy is just aiming a little left or right, I dodge the bullets, and I go on a kill streak. In real life, in combat, there is a fear. You're going to keep your head down when you hear machine gun fire. You don't want to run into that. So how do you create a mechanic to put that sense of fear? Well, in this case, suppression is one way of doing it. So, another thing, I could talk about that for a long time as well. And I'm actually going to do another episode in the future where I talk about weapons kick and recoil and all the various dynamics of what makes recoil strong and soft, be it your buttstock or your buffer tube or your buffer itself or your muzzle brake or the kind of ammunition you use. So it's very, very nuanced. Let's go on to the last question because I am running out of time. Dark Linkser, I don't understand why for Middle Eastern soldiers use AKs. Is it because it's cheaper? That is a great question. And that's because, and I'm going to make this short, I could, again, talk about this, about AKs for a long time. when the U.S. military buys AR-15s or M16s or M4s, they buy them in batches. They buy them to meet certain minimum amount of inventory requirements given obsolescence of older weapons and their force structure. And so Colt would get a production contract for 10,000 rifles. And the next year they're doing another 10,000 or another 10,000. I'm just making up numbers here, but we're talking about, they may get a production lot of maybe 100,000 rifles, but they're buying every year so many, right? And they're doing this so much that eventually when they get done and they've built enough rifles to field the entire army and all the reserve components and whatever, the older rifles now need to be replaced, and they continue on this charade. So when you look at the production rates of AR-15s and M16s throughout most of the Cold War, it was in the hundreds of thousands at the very most. And if you look at the size of the military as it went down, from the 40s, peaking in Korea, and then going a little bit back up in Vietnam, then going back down, the volunteer force, as that transition took place, made the number of weapons needed to go down. Just the opposite with Russia. The Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact countries adopted a policy which basically said that in the time of a conventional conflict, we would summon the manpower capacity out of the citizenry. And because of that, we're going to build enough AKs to equip every man, and in some cases every woman as well, with an AK. So the production rates out of Izmash, which was the biggest one, but when you look at Izmash and Tula and Moloch combined, they were making anywhere between 4 to 8 million AKs per year from the 1960s all the way up to the late 1980s. We're talking about more than an order of magnitude of weapons made between the Colt and the AR-15 and their $100,000 a year versus AKs, and that was just in the Soviet Union. You had in Romania, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, Hungary, China. They weren't part of the Soviet Union, but again, AK-making countries. They also did very similar policies. So when the Cold War ended, and during the Cold War as an instrument of policy, the Soviet Union and the non-aligned states, they could send AKs everywhere because they had so many of them. They were producing so many of them that they could give them away, and that's what they did a lot of times. So I mentioned in last episode that one of the guns that I like to get at one point is a Type 1 AK-47, which is a very rare AK-47 in the United States. And they predominantly are here in the United States from, at one point, the Soviet Union gave Egypt a bunch of Type 1 AK-47s. Egypt, at one point, utilized intermediaries and gave a bunch of AK-47s to the Palestinian Liberation Army, the PLA. PLA was fighting Israel during all these different wars, and Israel captured a bunch of these AKs. Israel then took those AKs, cut them up, and sent them to the United States for importation to sell to the civilian world, and that's how they're around here today. You see how that's working? So it's because they were proliferated like crazy, and there still are. So I have to cut this off. I got to get going. But in episode 5, send in your questions. If there are any guns that you want me to talk about, I will do that. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you later.